The biggest mistake memoir writers make is thinking they have to include everything that happened in the order it happened. You don't. You're still choosing, you're selecting, you're shaping, and you're crafting a story. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and book coach. Each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now, let's begin. I got a great question recently from a writer in my community. She's working on a memoir and asked, what's the difference between writing memoir and writing fiction? Usually when people ask this question, they already understand the obvious answer. Memoir is true, fiction is made up. But that's not really what they're asking. What they're really asking is this. How does the actual process of storytelling differ? What are the rules? What can I do in fiction that I can't do in memoir? And if I'm writing memoir, how much creative license do I have? These are smart, essential questions because while memoir and fiction have different contracts with the reader, they have a lot more in common than you might think when it comes to storytelling. So today I'm going to walk you through the key differences in how you tell a story when it's true versus when it's invented. And I'll help you understand what you can and can't do in memoir. So let's start with the most fundamental difference between memoir and fiction. The promise you're making to your reader. When you write fiction, the contract is, I'm going to tell you a compelling story. It's made up, but it will feel true to human experience. When you write memoir, the contract is, I'm going to tell you a true story about something that really happened to me. I'm shaping it into narrative, but the essential facts are real. This contract matters because it shapes what readers expect and what will break their trust. In fiction, readers don't care if you invented a character, moved a building to a different street, or combined 3 people into one. That's your job as a fiction writer. In memoir, readers are coming to you because they want to know about real events, real people, and real experiences. If they later discover you made up major elements, they'll feel lied to. Remember James' phrase, a million little pieces? The scandal wasn't that it was a bad book. It was good. The scandal was that he'd presented fiction as memoir. I don't think this was his fault, by the way. I think the publishers thought it would sell better as a memoir and coerced him into presenting it as memoir. But here's what confuses writers. Memoir is still a crafted narrative. You're not writing autobiography. You're writing a story. And that means you have more creative license than you might think. And you still need to select what events to include and shape them so they all point to the transformative event at the end. So let's talk about what you can and can't do. Let's start with dialogue. A question I sometimes get from memoir writers is, how can I include dialogue when I don't remember exactly what was said? Well, here's the truth. No one expects you to have perfect transcripts of conversations from years ago. That's impossible. Dialogue is never a transcription of real conversation. In fiction, you invent dialogue that sounds natural and serves your story. You have complete freedom. In memoir, you reconstruct dialogue based on your memory of what was said. You're aiming for the essence of the conversation, the emotional truth, even if you can't remember the exact words. And you can compress several conversations into one. So in memoir, you can reconstruct conversations based on your honest memory. You can capture the tone, the dynamic, the key points that were made. You can use dialogue that represents what was typically said, even if you can't pinpoint one specific conversation. What you can't do in memoir is invent conversations that never happened. You can't put words in someone's mouth that fundamentally misrepresent what they said or believed. And you can't create dialogue for dramatic effect that contradicts the truth. So ask yourself, is this dialogue true to what happened, even if I can't remember the exact words? If yes, you're fine. If you're making up conversations to get your point across, you've crossed into fiction. Okay, let's talk about time, sequence, and compression. This is where memoir writers often get confused. They think it happened over a 20-year span, so I need to show all 20 years. Or these events happened in this order, so I can't rearrange them. That's not true. You do not have to write the story chronologically. You can, but that doesn't mean you write everything that happened over that time span. For example, if a 5-minute conversation changed your life, you can give it 5 pages. But if a year of stability was important but uneventful, you can summarize it in a paragraph. In fiction, you have complete freedom to structure time however serves your story best. You can use flashbacks, flash forwards, parallel timelines, whatever works. In memoir, you also have significant freedom to structure time, but you need to be transparent about it. So here's what you can do in memoir. You can compress time. If something happened over 6 months, but the story works better condensed into a few weeks, you can do that. Just make it clear that you're compressing. You might say something like, over the course of that fall, rather than pretending it all happened in a week. You can also rearrange sequence for narrative purposes. If event B makes more sense to tell before event A for dramatic or thematic reasons, you can do that. Just make sure readers understand you're not presenting strict chronology. You always want to be marking time. When I was 14, in 2nd grade, etc. You can also create composite scenes. If you had essentially the same conversation with your mother 5 times, you can combine those into one scene that represents what typically happened. The emotional truth is what you're after, not a transcription of every conversation. Combining it into one scene is actually clearer than trying to document all 5 separately. You can also skip time. You don't have to include everything that happened. In fact, you shouldn't. You're telling a story, not writing an autobiography. So skip the parts that don't serve the narrative, that don't serve the truth or outcome you, as the main character, is ultimately moving towards. Okay, let's talk about composite characters and changed names. Another common question is, can I combine real people into one character? Can I change names to protect people? So let's talk about changing names. Many memoir writers change names of real people, particularly minor characters or people who might not want to be in your book, like a friend from school. You can note this in the author's note. Some names and identifying details have been changed. You can create composite characters. This is a little more controversial, but it's generally accepted if done transparently and for good reason. Composite characters make sense when you're writing about a time when you encountered many similar people. For example, nurses in a hospital or students in a class. Combining these characters into one representative character makes the story clearer. You can also use composite characters when you're protecting someone's identity by combining them with others. When the individual identities don't matter to the story, but the role or type of person does. So here's how to handle it ethically. You include an author's note explaining that some characters are composites. You don't have to specify which ones, but readers should know you've done this. Okay, let's talk about truth versus emotional truth. Here's a concept that helps memoir writers understand their creative license, the difference between factual truth and emotional truth. Factual truth is what literally happened, the verifiable facts. Emotional truth is what it felt like, the meaning and impact of what happened. Your primary obligation in memoir is to the emotional truth. You're not writing journalism or history. You're writing about your subjective experience of events. Now, nobody owns the truth, so your truth is valid. So what does this mean in practice? You can describe things the way you experience them, even if others might remember things differently. If your childhood home felt enormous and oppressive, you can describe it that way, even if objectively it was a modest 2-bedroom house, or if your siblings had a very different experience. And this brings up something unique to memoir. You're working with two voices at once, the voice of experience and the voice of innocence. The voice of innocence is you, the character living through these events who doesn't know yet how things will turn out. The voice of experience is you now, the narrator looking back with understanding and perspective. Good memoir layers these voices. You show us the younger you experiencing events, while the current you helps readers understand what it all meant. That's how you create both immediacy and meaning. Okay, let's talk about selection. In both fiction and memoir, you need the power of selection. You can focus on certain aspects and leave others out. If your father was complicated, both good and bad, your memoir about his abuse doesn't have to show his good qualities. You're not writing a balanced biography. This is your story of your experience. But here's a craft tip. Dualities are powerful in memoir. Sue Silverman wrote about her abusive father. She didn't show his good side, but she did show the split between who he was publicly and who he was privately at home. Publicly, he was a prominent businessman, the external man everyone respected, but he was also the man who abused her behind closed doors. That contradiction creates dramatic power and captures an important truth about abusers. They often have public faces that hide the private cruelty or fatal flaws. But emotional truth doesn't give you license to make things up or fundamentally misrepresent what happened. You can't claim abuse that didn't happen or invent a dramatic confrontation because it would be more satisfying or dramatic or make someone worse than they were. So ask yourself, am I being true to my actual experience, even if others might remember it differently? That's memoir. Am I making this up because it makes a better story? That's fiction. Now, most fiction writers I work with are basing their stories on real life, but because it's fiction and because they can change the facts, because they can invent characters or base characters on real people, they have some cover. Whereas a memoir writer is saying, this really happened to me. Now, in fiction, you can base characters on real people, but still change enough details to avoid defamation issues if you're portraying someone negatively. Okay, here's what memoir and fiction have in common. What often confuses memoir writers most is they think it really happened this way, so that's how I have to write it. But that's not true. Memoir uses all the same storytelling techniques as fiction. Both need a compelling protagonist, you, with clear desires and obstacles, rising tension and stakes, a narrative arc with a beginning, middle, and end, scenes, not just summary, sensory details and vivid description, emotional resonance, and a satisfying resolution. Both fiction and memoir require you to choose what to include and what to leave out. Shape events into narrative, create meaningful patterns and connections, build toward climactic moments and revelations, develop characters, even real ones, through action and dialogue, and make the reader feel something. The biggest mistake memoir writers make is thinking they have to include everything that happened in the order it happened. You don't. You're still choosing, you're selecting, you're shaping, and you're crafting a story. The difference is, in fiction, you invent the raw material. In memoir, life gives you the raw material, but you still have to shape it into a story. Both require the same craft skills. Both require you to understand structure, character pacing, and scene construction. So how do you decide whether to write your story as memoir or fiction? Write memoir when the truth of what actually happened is important to the story. When you want to share your real experience, not a fictional version of it. And when you're comfortable being identified as the protagonist. Write fiction when you want complete creative freedom to change events, combine characters, or invent details. When the emotional truth matters more than the factual truth. When you want distance from the real events. When you need to protect people's identities in ways that would require too much changing for memoir. When the story is inspired by real events, but you want to explore different outcomes or possibilities. And when you're uncomfortable with the exposure that comes with memoir. You can also write autobiographical fiction. Plenty of novels are heavily autobiographical, but still presented as fiction. This gives you more freedom while still drawing on real experience. Now, there's no right answer. Both are valid choices. Just be clear about which contract you're making with your reader. The key takeaway is this. Memoir and fiction differ in where the material comes from and what you're promising the reader, but they use the same storytelling techniques. If you're writing memoir, you have more creative license than you think. You can shape, compress, and reconstruct. You just can't fundamentally change what happened or who the main people in the story were. And whether you're writing memoir or fiction, you need to understand story structure, character development, and how to craft scenes that keep readers engaged. Strong storytelling applies whether you're writing from real life or inventing the story out of whole cloth. Either way, whether you're writing fiction or memoir, there will always be your personal connection to your story, the questions you want to pursue, the truths you want to uncover. So whatever form you choose, trust that you have the tools to tell your story well. Now, go write it. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing and I'll talk to you soon.